The coronavirus pandemic has impacted all of us in tremendous and profound ways, but data is showing that it may have had a more negative impact on women in our society. We talked about this with the editor-in-chief of Women's eNews, Dr. Lori Sokol, who's a women's advocate and had a lot to say about the matter. Dr. Sokol, thank you for talking to us. For those who may be unfamiliar with Women's eNews, just tell us about that.
I'd be pleased to, and thank you for having me here. Women's eNews is actually celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. We were launched in the year 2000. I'm not the founder. I took over about 5 years ago as its executive director and editor-in-chief. Women's eNews is the only online nonprofit news agency that provides exclusive coverage on the most crucial issues impacting women and girls around the world. We're the only one that does that, and we feed out to all of the mainstream media. Your show, for example, Fox 5, New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, you name it. We say from New York to New Delhi. We feed out original coverage, and we have freelance writers located in some of the most dangerous areas in the country for women and girls, reporting on what is happening. Everything from violence against women, rapes, child marriage, you name it. That's what we cover.
Okay, congratulations on 20 years of doing what you're doing and being that voice globally. You know, from what it sounds like. You were also recently in an article for Forbes magazine, if I remember correctly, about how the ongoing pandemic has negatively impacted women. Could you talk about that?
Yes, I'd be pleased to, because as with any tragedy, whether it be a pandemic, whether it be, for example, the attack on 9/11 in New York City and what it did to our country, when there are, it tends to uncover ways in a culture and in a society where biases, imbalances, and inequities are revealed. So as we know in this country all too much, particularly in the last few years, it has surfaced more and more, that those who face these inequities, women, people of color, the LGBT community, the Latina community, trans women of color in particular, have been victims of increasing violence in this country. And we see through the pandemic that they are being increasingly victimized, right? They are the ones, for example, who have lost more jobs during the pandemic. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, women accounted for 55% of the 20 million workers who were unemployed in April, compared to only 13% unemployment rate for men.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that when we see these numbers, it's one thing to say it, but when you see the actual numbers, you realize the impact on women. And for those who are continuing to work, and as the other fact that I think you'll find interesting, but not surprising, is that 80% of nurses around the world are women, right? And as is the case with any field where it's a majority of women, it is a underpaid field, right? So whether it be the nursing staff or teachers, particularly elementary school grades, even through high school, right? The hope is that this pandemic, like any tragedy, will bring these issues to the surface. So for once, ultimately, things like equal pay or the lack of equal pay for women of color, right, for Black women, for Latina women, which are significantly lower than white men are paid, will finally be addressed, because hopefully the importance of their work is not going to be taken for granted anymore, because they're the ones on the front lines saving lives.
Absolutely, and we certainly thank them and their colleagues, you know, for all the work they've done, particularly here in the Northeast, remembering just where we were 60 days ago, and now as we're watching things unfold throughout the world, and particularly what's going on in the South and the Southwest of the states. One of the things also that I heard the mayor say at one of the ComStat, you know, the statistic of how the city is doing crime-wise with the NYPD, is that domestic violence incidents have gone up during this time. Is that your understanding also?
Oh, there's no question. There's no question. So we have to look at why that is. And I have to say, the one positive thing about, I guess there's a silver lining for everything if you look hard enough, is that domestic violence was not much of an issue discussed in the news, right? But now it's on. That, that's what the pandemic has brought to the surface, the degree and the increase of domestic violence, which is mostly husbands committed against wives, right? The victims are mostly women. We need to make sure of that. So the number of calls, for example, in this country and particularly the state, New York, to 311 has increased significantly. But there's also an issue that we can't even look at that number and the number of calls that have increased, because now that the men are at home with their wives almost 24/7, these victims are not even able to make a call to 311. And also rape crisis centers are now understaffed. Domestic violence shelters are now understaffed. So these women can't even go to these places for help. Friends and family are being further distanced because of social distancing and the fear of, contracting the virus, and which is, is something that also needs to be a priority at this time. So they can't go to friends, they can't go to families' homes. They can only do it via telephone. And what happens if your abuser is there 24/7 with you? It's again, these injustices are being revealed more and more, and domestic violence is just another example of that being done. However, it's now rising to the surface, and we're all becoming much more aware of this problem.
And I'm glad that I did the story. If it's going to help someone who's in trouble, not just me, all the reporters who have touched on this during the pandemic, because like you said, until this, rarely did you hear it being addressed. It was always in some sort of collective uniform capacity, but now we're able to tell the individual impact of that, like that. So hopefully someone that's watching, even what you're saying now, will, if they get an opportunity to call 311, if they find themselves in that capacity. You also have a book coming out. I want you to tell us about this book. It's your second book.
Yeah, She Is Me, the bottom says How Women Will Save the World. And I started writing, it's very foretelling, this book, because I started writing it only took 8 months to write. I will never do that again. It was quick, it was fast, but it was needed. I started writing it in May, June of 2019. And based upon my experience as a journalist for over 30 years, I had come to recognize particularly women I have met with, women that some of us know, like Gloria Steinem, famous women like Gloria Steinem, Billie Jean King, Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, Nobel Peace Prize winners, ambassadors. These are women I know and have interviewed personally. They have been very effective in bringing about change in their communities, not through the traits that patriarchal cultures have taught us to believe as important and necessary to bring about change, right? They have done it through the more feminine traits that often in patriarchal cultures are looked at as weak because they're feminine, but they're actually more effective. So we're talking about compassion, empathy, introspection, kindness, right? All of these women, these 30 women I've interviewed from all over the world, have used these traits to save lives, right? Help their country's economies, right? Help the planet and limit the amount of climate change and improve sustainability within their countries. Now,
and a gala, really quickly. You have a gala coming up in October, correct?
October 26th, it was rescheduled. It was supposed to be May 4th, but because of the pandemic, and we are going to hold it virtually as well because we don't want to put anyone's lives or health at risk. So yes, it will be virtual. You can read about it and learn more about our honorees on Women's eNews.org. We have women and men who are being honored from all areas who are doing their best, 21 leaders for the 21st century to help save the world.
Dr. Lori Sokol, Women's eNews, congratulations on this 20. Good luck. Have another 20, have another 40. And thank you so much for being a part of our show today.
Thank you for welcoming me. I really appreciate your time.